Last night, the south of Iran shook with explosions, and there are more tonight, testing a ceasefire that may already be beyond breaking point. This was the American response to strikes on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. An overnight series of attacks on targets in the south, including air defense systems, radars and small boats used by Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard. Shortly after came the Iranian response. American assets in Bahrain and Kuwait under missile fire. Within hours, President Trump appeared to declare the ceasefire was already over.
I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. I'll speak to our negotiators. They want to negotiate. They're good people. Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. But they have to come back to me. As far as I'm concerned, it's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars.
Speaking at the NATO summit alongside the Ukrainian leader, he appeared to suggest more strikes were ahead.
We hit them very hard last night. Very, very hard. Probably hit them hard again tonight. I'll give them a little warning. We're going to hit them hard tonight.
In a move which will inflame the situation further, President Trump threatened a return of the naval blockade around the Strait of Hormuz and withdrew an agreement allowing Iran to sell oil on the open market, one of the key pillars of the already agreed Memorandum of Understanding. So far, the Iranian authorities have chosen not to formally respond to the president's comments, focusing instead on the penultimate day of the funeral services for the late Ayatollah in Iraq. But this country remains on a war footing, and further attacks will not go without a response.
And we can speak to Emma, who's in Iran's capital, Tehran, this evening. Emma, in the past hour, the United States has confirmed it is carrying out fresh strikes on Iran. What do we know at this stage?
Yes, they were confirmed a short time ago, and we're hearing reports from the south of the country of multiple explosions. Now, that's down near the Strait of Hormuz. It's the area that was hit last night, but this evening it seems that the reports are of a wider area of attack and also a more intense bombardment.
And given developments in the past 24 hours, how likely do you think a return to all-out conflict between the US and Iran is?
Well, President Trump was very clear today that these attacks would come, and indeed they have materialized now. And the Iranians have been equally clear that would there be any attacks, they would respond immediately. And in the last few minutes, we've heard from Iranian state TV that Iran plans to respond imminently to US bases in the Gulf. So that takes this whole situation another notch further towards that return to war that has been so concerning people across the globe, not least because of the knock-on effects economically to the effect of war that goes on here. Now, when I've been here during the course of this week, I've been speaking to various government officials about what their feeling is with regard to whether or not this ceasefire can hold. And their view was that they had hope that it might, but they had no sense of trust in the United States. And they were also very clear that they expected that this might well end up back in to war. Now, we are very close to that at this point. I was here just a few months ago on the last night of the war as it moved towards the ceasefire, and there is certainly a feeling, speaking to people in this country tonight, that they are moving very, very close to a return to that war, and it will be incredibly difficult to hold this ceasefire.
Emma in Tehran, many thanks indeed. Well, the NATO summit, where we heard President Trump talking about Iran, will be Sir Keir Starmer's last. The Prime Minister put a brave face on Mr. Trump's ongoing whinge-a-thon about him refusing to let American bombers use the Diego Garcia military base for its war on Iran. Sir Keir ended up saying he'd had a good relationship with the President and they'd stay in touch.
It's Keir Starmer's final rodeo as Prime Minister with world leaders at an important international summit. NATO summit, all about defence in Ankara, Turkey. And Keir Starmer seemed a bit lonely till the American president reached out. Sort of. But Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, couldn't resist a dig even today about how Starmer had refused to join his war against Iran.
The United Kingdom wouldn't let us use the island for 2 weeks. And I'm not happy with NATO because of the fact that they didn't want to help us with the #1 state sponsor of terror. That's Iran.
But it was left to NATO's Secretary-General to defend the outgoing British Prime Minister.
And I know you have a very strong relationship with the United Kingdom, the King, but also you personally always with Keir Starmer, who is now leaving office. He has now also committed to spend another $20 billion extra, 15 billion pounds on defence. So I would argue without you in this chair, this would not have happened.
Throughout the day, the leaders were anxious that Trump would derail their plan to commit a further 70 billion euros of military aid to Ukraine next year for its defence against Putin's aggression. But apparently, in the end, it was all sweetness and light. So for all Donald Trump's complaints that his allies in NATO haven't supported him in his war with Iran, at the close of NATO's summit, apparently he said there'd been a great sense of unity among NATO's leaders. So is there any chance Starmer will remain a buddy of Donald Trump?
I do think it's important for the British Prime Minister to have a good relationship with the President of the United States. I'm glad that that's what I've been able to achieve. That has been what I set out to do. I think it's really important for my country, and that's what always comes first.
And he wished you well?
Yes, he did, and we're going to stay in touch.
And what's more, the American president seems at last to be listening more to Ukraine's President Zelensky than to the tyrant Putin.
What are President Putin's conditions for ending the war? Do you know what?
Well, they were certain conditions that were a little bit different. I think they're changing. I think they're probably getting a little bit better toward some of the things that you'd like. It's been tougher in Russia. It's been a lot tougher than it was supposed to be.
The loneliness of the long-distance politician whose race is almost run. In international affairs, he'd be seen to have performed well for Britain. Foreign affairs were not why his MPs wanted him out. Robert Peston for News at 10 at the NATO summit in Ankara, Turkey.
Well, you saw Donald Trump there with Ukraine's President Zelensky. Among the topics they discussed at the NATO summit was giving Ukraine the ability to make its own Patriot missiles for its fight against Russia. We can get more on this from Dan, who's in Washington for us this evening. And Dan, why is President Trump doing this, and how significant could it be?
Well, potentially, Gamal, it could be pretty significant. There are a lot of caveats in all this. This is something that Ukraine has been pushing for months because they simply can't hold back the number of Russian ballistic missiles they're facing, about 100 a month. But the Patriot system is extremely expensive and there is a worldwide shortage. Each one of those Patriot missiles that you see there costs about $3 million, and the entire battery, including the launcher, is about $1 billion. So it's extremely expensive, very complex. Now the question is, does Ukraine have the capability to produce this itself under some sort of license? I think a lot of people are scratching their heads and wondering quite how that would work, or whether it would have to be contracted out to a neighbouring country like possibly Poland. But also there's going to be a huge time delay for setting all this system up, and that is time that Ukraine really feels it doesn't have. On the other side of the equation, you know, the US simply has run down its stockpile of Patriot missiles. They produce about 600 a year, and a lot of that stockpile has been depleted in the war in the Gulf. On the other side, you know, what does America want from this? Why is it offering this at this point? Well, I think Ukrainian drone technology is probably the answer to that. Ukraine has become a worldwide leader in drone technology, and that is something that President Trump is interested in to deploy in other theatres like the Middle East. And you'll remember when Zelensky and Trump had that big row in the White House where Donald Trump told President Zelensky, "You don't have any cards." Well, now perhaps Ukraine does.